changed their minds and thought that, you know, maybe you just weren't interested. So I guess somebody changed their mind about me enough to the point that when I was finally going to the courthouse in Maryland, Alvaro was asking me when I was going to go there, what time I was going to arrive, what I was planning to do, everything. And when I got there, I was met in line. Behind me was a federal worker. And maybe it was a state worker, but it was some kind of a cop. Some kind of cop or intelligence. And I have just recently, and probably in the last week, I always knew that I always knew that there was something suspicious about the fact that all the guards at that courthouse knew who this man was already. So that indicated that he had some kind of a role with the justice system. And they waved him past the electronic scanner, you know, the thing that you go under where they check to see if you have any metal on your person, like any weapons, that kind of thing. And they waved him right on through that he didn't have to go through it. And the only thing that I remember is I remember always thinking, well, they waved him through it because they already knew who he was because he's working for the government in some way, the justice system. But it was just like in this last week, like a few days ago, that I realized a second part of that. I believe the second part of that is that he didn't go through that electronic thing because he must have been carrying a concealed weapon. And if he had gone through it, it would have gone off. He would have had to take out his gun, and then I would have known for sure that he was law enforcement or something else that carries the weapon. So then he was inviting me to, he was saying he could help me. All he was telling me was that he was a lawyer, or he'd done some legal work for himself, and he knew people, maybe he could help me out. And then he said, why don't I go out to lunch with him? And he basically pulled me away from the counter, kind of like before I could get more things taken care of. I had to file a restraining order for myself against that woman, and I also had to contest the one that she had made against me. But then he kind of pulled me to the side and said that he wanted to help me, and I was gullible and hoping that somebody might be able to help me somehow, somewhere. So I went with him after these guards, you know, ushered us past all these, you know, points. And then we were going to his car, and I kind of thought that, well, since all these guards knew him, he must be a safe person, which is also a bad assumption to make, but that's what I thought. So then I saw his car, and his car was basically like the same model and brand and style and everything that the police use. Or that the FBI use, police or FBI. And actually, I remembered that fact because I remembered a lawyer from Portland, Oregon a long time ago who was a lawyer that was that had a case against the Archdiocese of Portland and Oregon in the clergy abuse case. And he told me one time that there was a contract that what kind of cars some of the FBI used because of their contract with certain car manufacturers. And I can't remember why he told me that. It wasn't like he was trying to tip me off to something. It came up in normal conversation, but I have no idea why and how. I just remember I never forgot that. So, you know, first the guy is looking like a cop, kind of sounding like, looking like a cop with the way he's being treated by the guards. Then I see his car, and I'm thinking, this looks like the exact same kind of, this is like it was like a Mercury type of a, or whatever it was that they contracted to have. And it didn't have, you know, bells and whistles and all of that. It was like it looked like an unmarked state vehicle or federal vehicle, sedan type of a deal. So then I got in, or either that or I followed him. I think maybe I saw him get into his car and then I followed him to this place. And I'm pretty sure I followed him because I don't remember the interior of that car at all. And anyway, wait a second. No, I did get into his car. because I thought maybe I could trust him then, since the guards know him. I'm pretty sure. So then he drives to this restaurant, and he basically then attempts to, and this is, I showed up at a time that I had only told Alvaro Pardo about, my fiance. And he basically tells me that, I told him that I was engaged, and he said, oh, and he said, who to, and that kind of thing, just small talk. And then he said, well, he said, if the guy is wanting his green card, he said, I didn't tell him anything about why we were engaged or what our situation was or when we were planning to get married or anything. And all of a sudden he was saying, I have this guy that I know, that I've met. He's a doctor, and he really wants to get married, and he really wants to be in the United States. And he said, he'd probably, and I did tell him that, because then he said, is he going to help you out with your son or your legal stuff? And I said, yeah, probably. He'll probably help me out with some of my legal stuff with my son, which was also helpful for my son's situation. And, nothing against law about that. And then he said, well, I have a guy that could pay you $20,000 a month, something like that, and you don't have to sleep with him, and he just wants to get married and be able to practice medicine in the United States. And he said, you want to talk to the guy that I know about it? And I said, well, I'm already engaged, and I'm not interested. And he said, well, why don't you just talk to this guy? And I was kind of curious as to why he wanted me to talk to this one man and who this person was. And he didn't really the cop didn't take no for an answer. And I kept telling him no, I wasn't interested. But then he said, go ahead and talk to this guy. So then I talked to him. And he basically was saying the same thing. That his friend, wanted, it was like a telephone conversation, which was probably tapped. And he said his friend had, wanted to get married and be a legal resident of the United States and all of this. And then he asked me over the phone, he said, so were you intimate with your fiance before he asked you to marry him, like Alvaro? And I said yes. And both of them, the guy that I was with and the guy on the phone, they didn't like that answer, because I guess what they were looking for is some excuse to try to get me for marriage fraud because of Alvaro. And I think that the law was maybe that if he had made an offer and then we were together, it was more along the lines of looking like marriage fraud. But if he had just said he might help out with some things, or if he had made a proposal after we were intimate, then it didn't look like marriage fraud or a business deal or something like that. And I later looked into it because I knew someone was trying to set me up. So I was wondering what angles they were going for and why they were trying to get a certain answer out of me. So when I said this one thing, then they looked like, darn, they couldn't get me. And then this guy said, well, he said, I'd like to get you a phone card and you can call me and talk to me about this some more. And so I said, okay, you could get me a calling card. So we got a calling card at this one place, and then he wrote a number on it with a black marker, and then he gave me the half that just was the calling card, but he kept the other half. So he kept the half that had like the serial number on it and everything, or which card it was. And that was another thing. I was like, who does that, keeps a number of a card, unless it wasn't my phone number? So I thought, who does that except for maybe like a cop trying to keep track of which number, which card that they have to trace or something. So then I got back to the house, and actually after he left, I just had this sinking feeling in my stomach, and I was like, my fiance, Alvaro Pardo, just set me up. First, they were making an effort to keep me from getting to the courthouse to contest this Nigerian you know, judo chopping woman who was connected to the CIA. And then I'm being directly set up. Like, they're trying to entrap me into a marriage fraud case. And I looked up marriage fraud because I was like, I can't believe it. We looked up marriage fraud at that point, and it was like a 10-year prison penalty. And I thought, who knew that I was going there, and this guy was going to show up, and I was like, the only person who was asking all the questions when he usually doesn't was Alvaro. So then I got back to our place, and I looked at him while I was doing my makeup in the bathroom or something, and he came around and he's like, so how'd everything go? And I said, well, and I looked over and I said, I got set up at the courthouse for some guy who I think is a cop and wanted me to or I said, no, I didn't say that first. I said, well, I said, had somebody try to make a deal with me on getting married to somebody else. And I remember Alvaro said, well, why don't you take it? I remember just thinking, he just said, well, why don't you take it? Okay, this is like nightmare from United States. Why don't you take it? Well, why don't you take it? Thanks, crazy gift bag Middletons. And, right, the Middletons don't work with the United States intelligence community at all. We're really sure about that now. And I just thought, I concealed my shock and horror at his reaction and his response to that. Why don't you take it? And I said, because I'm engaged to you. And I did put on a little bit of an innocence look at that moment, because in that moment I was starting to think he was a dirty rat. And I was engaged to him, so why was he trying to agree with a cop and to try to have me get set up to go to jail for 10 years? Why don't you take it? And I said, because I trust you. And then I remember he went up with his back up against the wall and just looked at me with guilt. It's like once he moved out of the hallway and leaned up against the wall, it was like he went into the shadows a little bit, and I saw this look on his face. He just looked guilty, and he kind of looked like, he sort of, I don't know. Because I trust you. You effer. You FBI fill in the blank. Because I trust you, and why would I want to be with anybody else? I'm engaged to you. We're getting married, right? So then, we stayed together, and I think that he was then thinking, how do I back out of this? He just tried to back out of it by setting me up. And